Hello and welcome to the Electric Wire podcast. I am Kristin Gilkes, the Executive Director of the Customers First Coalition. I am your host for this podcast. We are bringing you an energy innovation series. This is a series of 6 podcasts dedicated to exploring new technologies in the energy industry. I would like to thank the members of the Customers First Coalition for sponsoring our podcast. The members are the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, Dairyland Power Cooperative, the IBEW 2150, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, Renew Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association, and WPPI Energy. Today, we are bringing you a podcast where we explore issues related to energy storage. We take a look at storage issues from a customer perspective. We are delighted to have Tom Content of the Citizens Utility Board joining us for the first interview of this podcast. I thought he had some really nice insights to share regarding how customers can really benefit with increased adoption of energy storage and how their organization will look at utility proposals going forward. Our second interview is with Bob McKee of ATC, American Transmission Company. Bob is their Strategic Initiatives Director, and this is a really fun interview. Bob is a self-proclaimed energy geek, and so we discuss at length their storage as transmission-only asset project near Waupaca, Wisconsin. This is a pilot project for them. It's the first of its kind in Wisconsin, and I think you'll learn a lot from this episode, including a new acronym. With that, I am just going to give you a couple of links to follow up on that we discuss in this podcast. We talk about the new MWork Great Plains Institute report. You can find a link to that report in the show notes or go to mwork.org/WEDTI-report. I also wanted to mention that Customers First Coalition hosted a power breakfast, Game Changers Power Breakfast in 2019, where we had an excellent presentation on energy storage from Troy Miller of GE Power. And you can still find his presentation and the following panel discussion archived on the Wisconsin Eye website. That is at wisi.org. Search for Customers First, Game Changers Breakfast. And Troy's presentation begins around the 57-minute mark. You'll also find a link in the show notes that takes you directly to that presentation. So if you're looking for more on energy storage after you've listened to this podcast, you can always go there for more follow-up. With that, I will turn you over to our interviews, first with Tom Content and then with Bob McKee. Thanks for listening. I am joined today by Tom Content, who is the Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board. Tom is actually a member of the Customers First Coalition Board of Directors. He is serving in the role as our Secretary Treasurer right now. Thank you, Tom, so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the pod.
Yay.
Great to be here.
We're excited to have you. So can you tell us a little bit more about CUB, the Citizens Utility Board, and what your role is there?
Sure. So CUB is the Citizens Utility Board, and we are the consumer advocate for the residential and small business customers of all the utilities in Wisconsin that are regulated by the Public Service Commission. So that's electric, natural gas, and water for that matter. We focus primarily on electric and natural gas, and CUB has been around for 40 years, just over 40 years. It was created by the legislature. The legislature wanted to make sure there was a level playing field between sort of the utilities and the big businesses that advocate and are always at the PSC trying to get their points of view across and to make sure there was a solid customer voice at the Public Service Commission. So we do regulatory work focused mainly on rate cases, but also on construction cases for new power plants or power lines.
How long have you been at CUB now?
I've been at CUB just over 3 years.
And before that, you worked at the Journal Sentinel covering energy issues, right?
That's right. So I was a reporter covering energy and utilities, and it kind of morphed into covering sustainable business as well, while I was there. And so spent a lot of time getting to know the industry and getting to know the players, and be was glad to make the transition from kind of observing to kind of getting more involved as an advocate for the customers.
Right. So tell us more about this sustainable business piece that you covered at the Journal Sentinel. What were some of the companies and how did they relate to our energy storage discussion today?
Well, in some ways I fell into it. In some ways we just created it out of thin air. But I think you're seeing the trend towards sustainable business. You know, back in the '90s, there were folk. You know, BP was talking about beyond petroleum, and GE was talking about eco-imagination and things like that. But what we saw at the Journal Sentinel was that there was a growing, emerging area in Wisconsin for this. And part it was through Johnson Controls and some of the businesses that they have that were actually based here, which is they have both the energy efficiency business for buildings, as well as, which does controls as well as chillers and different things, but a lot of electronics. They were the inventor of the room thermostat back in the 1800s, Warren Johnson was. And then also they have an automotive battery business. And so as you look at the trends, what we're seeing now today, you see this whole things merging into their technology on the battery side that they have through vehicles is transitioning into vehicles for batteries for electric vehicles. And then on the energy side, there's more, the energy grid is getting more distributed all the time, and so you see this convergence, and it's been fascinating to watch. It was fascinating to cover, just because it seems like the energy world is changing more in the last few years than it had in, say, 100 years before that.
That is very true. And as we're talking about sort of this energy transition, I know there was a group that was formed about a year ago by both MWork and the Great Plains Institute. And the group came together to recommend some initiatives. The set of recommendations is called the Wisconsin Energy Distribution Technology and Innovation Report. I had to read that, so I didn't screw it up. This report detailed some policies that Wisconsin could put in place to help speed up this clean energy transition. And you served on the group that put together these recommendations. So since I've got you here and we're talking about energy storage, what's in this report as it relates to storage? Some high level things relating to storage.
Yeah, sure. And so overall, the report has a lot of different aspects. And one of the things that we liked about this collaborative is that you were able to talk in detail about the demand side of life with the energy system, because we've spent so much of our time thinking about the supply side of life with building. What are we going to do? We're going from this macro to the micro, from these central station power plants to a more distributed energy future. And along that, this report has a lot of interesting recommendations that really boost energy efficiency and the customer side of things, and part of the customer side is energy storage. And so a couple of things that are going on, there are some federal rules that are being developed on how storage is regulated and managed, and that's being dealt with by FERC in Washington, and then MISO, which is the grid operator for the mid-central United States, is working on that as well. And so the report actually advocates for Wisconsin stakeholders and utilities to be more involved at the MISO level in shaping how these rules are formed. And then back here in Wisconsin, we have rules for connecting, for if I want to put solar panels on my house, or if you wanted to put it on your house, there are rules that are in place on how you connect that. PSC set up rules years ago on that. And those rules would now need to be updated to accommodate storage, because there's just different things. It's not a generation source. Storage isn't a generation source per se, but it ends up acting as one, as we're seeing in or helping act as one, and helping keep the lights on in places like Australia, where they've had power supply challenges, and even some of the recent things in California, where they have had to have blackouts. You've seen a role for storage there through some new large storage projects that have just come online to help mitigate that.
We're sort of just talking about this, but what are some of the benefits of storage for customers?
Yeah, and that's the benefits of storage are I mean, it's always been so fascinating because the frustrating thing about renewable energy is that it gets dark at night and the solar panels stop running, and same thing with wind power when it stops being windy. So if it's almost like it's almost as if it's this has a little bit of magic to it, that just the simple batteries that are in our phones and our computers and now in our cars can be put together into giant blocks that actually can keep things going. So it's all about resilience, I think, and it's all about it's innovation and resilience, and it's extending the benefits of clean energy. Obviously, there's a cost. The economies of scale haven't been there for it to be deployed widely yet. But what's encouraging is that if you see the trend line on solar, the prices have come down 90% over the last 8 years at least. And the same trend lines are visible if you look at the price for lithium-ion batteries. And so that's what's enabling it to emerge so much, so that you're seeing large projects deployed on the grid side, and then you have smaller projects available for homes and businesses.
Do you expect to see utility scale projects that combine renewable energy and storage, and how would CUB evaluate proposals like that?
Yeah, there's been one or two of the solar projects that have already been making their way through the PSC have a storage component, but the storage component was kind of a later phase, and we have to balance, the cost for customers, because unfortunately we want to make sure our rates we want to get our rates to be even more affordable than they are. Our rates as just straight electric rates are higher than the Midwest average and higher than the national average, and so that's why especially given the economic situation we're in, keeping a focus on affordability is important. But the fact is, we know we think storage and the price trends are such that it can be and will be competitive. It's just a question of timing. And what's interesting for Wisconsin, just going back to the reason MWork is so involved, and the Midwest Energy Research Consortium, is there is a Wisconsin play here as far as different companies. And I mentioned Johnson Controls, and they ended up selling that business, but they still have folks in Wisconsin working now for Con Ed and out of New York on a battery storage business. And then Generac, which is known for backup power generation, made a big storage acquisition last year, and they're coming out with a home product just to go up against Tesla's Powerwall. So you see this emerging field, and there's a Wisconsin play for that. And the other way that customers can benefit, you're seeing this if you aggregate a whole bunch of storage at once, and the utility can kind of call on those batteries, even if they're in people's homes, if they're that small. If you have enough of them, it can make a difference on those hot summer days. And that's what's crucial for keeping the electric grid reliable, but it's also crucial for keeping costs down, because when we build our utility system, it's based on how much power is being consumed at the peak, which is the hottest summer days. And so if utilities if there were 300 homes or 500 homes that each had a Powerwall or some equivalent, or a Generac, a version of its storage system or whichever technology, and the utility can call on those right when the demand is peaking, that helps mean we have to build fewer power plants, and it helps keep anything that helps reduce system costs, reduces costs for everybody in the long run.
Right. So how does storage fit in with some of the other trends you're seeing, like with energy efficiency and peak shaving, etc.?
Yeah, no, I think it's really an interesting time, because you're seeing this whole move where we're not just as concerned about how much electricity is being used, but when it's being used. And so you're seeing programs that like MG&E and Excel Energy are deploying, where they manage the chargers, just like I was talking about with potentially managing the home battery systems. They're managing the electric vehicle charges. And so you're seeing this whole move toward a more distributed grid, but it's also a more, what we like at Cub is the fact that for our small business members, or for homeowners, or even renters, we hope through landlords, we hope that there can be a way to have it be more customer focused. So in other words, it's the it's not just the quality of the power and the cost of the power, but is it the power that I want to develop here? And so it's fascinating from the customer perspective, and it's interesting from a Wisconsin perspective too, because you're seeing this emergence of microgrids, and which is a term that not many people were using 20 years ago, but it turns out that a professor, Lassiter at UW, was kind of the father of the term microgrid, and now you hear that term more and more, and it's part of this whole move toward both resilience, reliability, and innovation. It's a neat combination.
As we see extreme weather events, storms, they just had the derecho event in Iowa.
Yes.
And other storms out east that are causing prolonged power outages. What is the role of storage and microgrids that you see going forward? Does that create some complications for you as you're evaluating utility proposals, or how are you looking at that through the customer lens?
I think that's where you're looking at, for instance, there's a project where a utility has to balance, what kind of distribution line upgrade do I need for a remote area, and does a microgrid make sense for that? And that's something that one of our utilities, Alliant, is moving forward with a project for something that serves a DNR, relatively remote DNR building that would have required a pretty lengthy distribution upgrade, and they ended up going with a combination of a mini microgrid / battery solution for that. And so that's something that you take into account. And then when you mention the impact of storms and everything, Tesla had built a pretty big system, what was at the time the biggest in the world, in Australia, which is having extreme heat and reliability challenges, and that helped keep the lights on there. And recently was called on when storms felled a big power line, a transmission line that linked it from basically the equivalent of one state to another. I don't know if they call them provinces or territories there, but they called on that 100 megawatt storage facility to help keep the lights on. So you're seeing a bigger and bigger role for it almost every year.
Are there other issues relating to storage that you wanted to discuss before we sort of?
I think the main thing is just to watch this space and just keep your eyes on it, because it's changing quickly. It's one of the exciting parts of the energy industry right now, but it's also one of the things it could be pretty transformative. It'll be interesting to see, as the utilities come up with have developed these carbon reduction pledges to reduce or eliminate their carbon footprint. And as the state government leadership is announced moves to that direction, it'll be interesting to see how much storage is called on as kind of to help supplement all the renewable energy that's being proposed, because that's going to be the challenge. Is renewable energy is intermittent, but more and more we're seeing, and that was always a drawback, but the more and more states are relying more and more on on renewable energy, and the challenge is providing that extra layer of security and energy security and reliability. And certainly Wisconsin hasn't had supply problems in a long time, but the challenge is if we're going to make this transition, frankly, I'm rooting for the economics of storage to really be to really keep moving in a favorable direction for us.
Thank you. Tom, if you had all of the power in the energy industry for a day, what would you do with it?
Wow. So if I had all the power, my focus and Cub's focus this year has been a lot about the pandemic and the economic fallout and the impact on the low income folks. And so right now, if I had the power today, it would be finding innovative ways to provide rate relief and energy assistance to keep people in their homes and apartments, and also find a way to boost the energy efficiency of those buildings going forward. But I think what we need now is innovation. And if I could just snap a finger and not have anybody shut off during the pandemic, but also have us structure a way that low-income customers aren't paying too much, and also down the road, all customers aren't paying too much. It's a big balancing act. If I could solve that problem single-handedly, that would be a lot of power.
Keep working on it. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us. I really appreciated having you here.
No, it's a great opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Bob McKee from ATC for joining us today. Bob, tell us more about ATC and your role at ATC.
Well, first of all, Kristin, thank you so much for inviting American Transmission Company, ATC, and myself to chat about storage as transmission, and specifically our Wapaka area storage project. From our perspective, and we'll get more into this, this is a technology, as these technologies emerge, we want to be able to add them to our toolbox, if you will, to be able to provide reliable and economic transmission service. So ATC, we began operations in 2001. We are the nation's first multi-state transmission utility. We're a founding member or founding transmission owner of MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. Our economic regulators, FERC, but for routing and siting of projects, we are, our regulator is the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin for those projects in Wisconsin. A little bit about the size of our system. We're primarily in Wisconsin and in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We have about 9,900 miles of transmission lines. We have 568 substations. And in terms of our customers are the utilities. So we have 17 network customers. However, it's important to note that one of those customers is WPPI, and they have quite a bit of customers. So overall, we have 72 utility customers. And in terms of the amount of end-use customers or consumers who we actually serve, it's about 5 million. So last year, our system peak was about 12.5 gigawatts.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Bob, your role at ATC, I think your title is Energy Geek. Am I correct there?
Informally, yes. I am the strategic projects director for ATC. What that entails is that it's a really cool role. I lead the development, evaluation, and execution of strategic and innovative initiatives, such as adopting new types of technology and assets like the Wapaka Area Storage Project and new service offerings. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So tell us more about this Wapaka project. Tell us about the impetus behind it and what you hope to accomplish with it.
Sure. So let's first start out with the issue, right? So it's really in central Wisconsin. It's in Waupaca and Portage counties, right in that area. And we have a situation where when we have at certain levels of load, after the first contingency or first problem on the system, so for instance, if we lose a transmission line,
Sure.
We're required to sectionalize or radialize with one single feed load. And that does put that load to some level of risk. And however, what the battery will enable us to do, and we'll get into more details of what the battery is, what the battery will enable us to do is it'll enable us to keep the system networked longer. It gives us operational flexibility, and it also helps support the voltage in that area as well. So for instance, we don't have to start operating the battery until not just the first contingency, but we can wait until the second contingency. So again, it really gives us operational flexibility. In terms of the project itself, I can go over some of the project details. It's a package of facilities. I would say anchored by, if you will, the battery. So it's a 2.5 megawatt, 5 megawatt hour battery. So it's a 2-hour duration battery. It's a lithium ion battery. That's what the design is right now. The battery would be at the Harrison North substation. We also include with it what is called shunt capacitors, which is a technology that helps address and support voltage. And then there's some other more traditional fixes like a bus upgrade. The project is $8.1 million. That's what the cost estimate is now. The expected in-service date, right now the in-service date, we're shooting for the end of next year. However, and we'll get into this a little bit later, the regulatory process, we just got an order from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, MISO did, on some tariff revisions that are needed for this project. And there's some compliance required, and it depends, Kristin, in terms of when FERC approves that compliance filing, when the MISO board could formally include it in the regional plan. So we're really, we're hoping to keep expediting the process so we could get it into service as soon as possible.
Thank you, Bob.
Sure.
So can you talk a little bit more about this FERC order that you mentioned and some of the implications it'll have on your project?
Absolutely. I'm gonna go to the energy geek zone. I'm gonna step a little farther back.
Well, you weren't there yet, but now we're going.
Now I'm going there. Now I'm gonna go there. Yeah. Yeah. So with storage, with energy storage, this is a technology that's been around for a while, right?
Sure.
Pump storage hydro has been around for quite a while. However, we're getting to a point where different types of storage are becoming more like lithium-ion batteries. They're becoming more cost-effective, becoming more mature, and so there hasn't really been, up to recently, policy around, okay, how do you use storage, say, in the market, and how do you use storage for transmission? So storage for transmission, there was a really landmark order, Order 841, that addressed storage in the market. That basically said, hey, you should, RTOs and ISOs, you should enable storage to participate in markets to the fullest degree that they're technically capable of doing. And we've seen compliance, all the RTOs comply, and they're redesigning their markets to enable that. But for storage as transmission, that wasn't included in Order 841. So we're relying on a couple of one precedent and one policy statement. The precedent came out in 2010. It's called Western Grid. It basically said it was a request for a declaratory order that asked FERC permission to treat a set of batteries as transmission. And FERC said, you could, because of how they're being used. And that was back in 2009, 2010. 2017 policy statement came out around clarifying that storage could be used as a transmission, for transmission, generation, or both. And it talked about cost allocation and some other things, right? Of how, what the RTOs and ISOs, how, what they would have to consider. But if you go to the individual RTO tariffs, now we operate under the MISO tariff. Back in 2008, in January, when we approached MISO about what the rules entailed, storage was just seen or reflected in the tariff as a resource. So in order for us to use storage as transmission, as a transmission asset, tariff revisions were needed. So starting in April of 2018, and I would say up to now, and we talk a little more about the FERC order, we've had a stakeholder process, a rather lengthy stakeholder process that was quite active. There were folks on either side of the issue. Ultimately, MISO filed their tariff revisions that basically said, okay, if you have a storage asset that you want to propose as a storage device that you want to propose as a transmission asset, it would have to go through the planning process like other transmission facilities would. It did take into account some additional issues or aspects of storage, like, for instance, there's a test that it doesn't interfere with queued generation, right? Generation that's in the interconnection queue, and cost allocation was treated the same. FERC ultimately, there was a technical conference earlier this summer, early summer in May, and then FERC just issued an order on the, let me look here, on the 10th of August. So basically accepting MISO's tariff revisions. There were some compliance items that MISO will have to take care of, and that compliance filing is due, I believe, the 25th of September. So, and that's going to enable us then, and other transmission owners, to start looking at batteries and other storage devices to address issues on the transmission system as transmission assets.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
So I know you considered alternatives, wire alternatives and non-wire alternatives, as you were coming up with this project. What are the cost differences as you considered these options?
Sure, and that's a great segue into, maybe I'll throw out there now. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Why is a transmission owner thinking about storage, other than interconnecting it? Because I think commonly storage is viewed as a resource. From our perspective, there are benefits of storage that could be used to address issues on the transmission system. For instance, voltage support. I talked to you earlier about operational flexibility of the transmission system. So we're seeing costs of storage, particularly with lithium-ion batteries, decline. We're seeing that those devices, that technology becoming more mature. There's more batteries being installed. Yes, we're learning and maybe we'll get into that later, we're learning a lot about these devices. And I believe industry is addressing these concerns. And the other cool thing about storage is the flexibility. That you could use storage for, say, to address operational flexibility, or maybe to defer a transmission facility, but you could use that same device to offer, possibly, depending on how it's designed, market services, right? Like reactive power. So there's so much flexibility with storage that as a transmission owner, we want access to that technology to serve our customers. Now, going to the Wapaka project, the alternative we looked at, and this is a real good example. So the capital cost for the battery and the other facilities that would be part of the project, $8.1 million in capital costs. The alternative that we looked at was a rebuild of a 115 kV line in that area that we'd have to double circuit. The capital cost for that was $11.3 million. We even looked at, and ATC took a very conservative approach in cost estimating this project. We worked with a consultant, communicated with vendors to really get as much information as we can, because this is a relatively new technology for utilities, right? So we wanted to leverage as much information and knowledge as we could. So we looked at a 40-year life of both the transmission line and the storage project, and this was done in the MISO planning process. So for the battery, it came out to be $12.4 million, and that is operations, maintenance, replacement of battery cells over time.
Life cycle costs.
Exactly, it's a pure life cycle cost. And then for the transmission line, it was $13.1 million.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a cost savings right there. The other thing that was beneficial about storage is, let's call it speed to the ball, right? For us to build a transmission line, it takes a great deal of time. Everyone who listens to your podcast knows that. From routing and siting, construction, for instance, with this project that we're looking at, the alternative, we would have to double circuit a line that went through a residential area near a high school. We do it, and it takes a certain amount of time, and there's challenges, right? With the battery, we already had space available in the Harrison North substation. So we don't have to go through those routing and siting. We don't have those routing and siting challenges. So you think of needs, emergent needs, and the possibility that storage could be installed much quicker than, say, a more traditional transmission line.
Right.
And that really, again, that gives a little more insight into why a transmission owner would want to, have this tool in its toolbox. Right. The only other thing I'll say before I shut up is, storage isn't going to be the answer to everything. It's
Sure.
not. We're not going to, throw storage at every single problem we have on the system. However, like I said before, that's a technology that we want available to us to be able to address issues for our customers.
That's interesting. That's actually kind of where I was going with my next
Sure.
question is, what kind of data do you need from this project before you can apply it to other areas, and how quickly do you think that could happen?
Sure. So I would say that as the industry adopts storage, there's learning, right? And we'll learn from this project, and we already have. right? So
Yeah.
where the project is right now is it's gone through the MISO regional planning process. It's ready to go. Once we get we don't believe there's any more evaluation that's needed. Once we get the approval of MISO's compliance filing from FERC, we're going to have to make a change, a tariff change that's ATC specific as well from an accounting standpoint. Once those are approved, then we could start move forward and construct the project. But even up to this point, Kristin, we have learned a great deal and we'll continue to learn a great deal. So we're going to keep learning from our experience and from the experience of the industry, and just as we do with our other technologies. So, and again, in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily view it as we have to learn, reach a certain amount of learning or get a certain amount of data or something before we do the next one. From our perspective, now that we have the regulatory framework for using this, now it's a tool that we know we have. So the next time we come upon something that we think, oh, this might work, we'll apply it. But that learning is always going on, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I guess I was just curious, are we going to see other projects popping up now, or is it like question. This one is in service at the end of 2021 and then you start the whole process again on the next one in 2022, I'm just curious how quickly you think this will start happening.
Yeah, where will you see the next ATC battery, right? So, not to be repetitive, but so right now there's not another project in the regional planning process. We don't have another, they call these storage as transmission only asset projects, or SATOA, because in the utility industry, we have to have an acronym for everything. We have an acronym for this one too. The ATC doesn't have another SATOA project in the planning process at this point. However, as issues emerge, either as things pop up or issues pop up, or in our long-range planning process, if we see something that would potentially this would be a good solution for, we'll evaluate it, and as we do with all the other technologies that we use. And again, this hopefully this doesn't come across as too trite, but from our perspective, we view it this way. This is another tool that we have, and it's does some pretty cool stuff.
Cool. So is the company looking at connecting any large-scale storage assets to the grid on the customer side? And what considerations would you have when the storage is on the customer side?
Yeah, so right now, to level set, and again, I'm going to make this distinction between, and I think you did a great job of doing it, right? So we have transmission facilities. Those are the facilities that are part of the bulk electric system that we operate as ATC, that we use to provide transmission service. And the Wapaka Area Storage Project will be part of that transmission system. Then there's the other aspect of, quote unquote, the grid and the resources that are connected to it. Right now, there are 0 storage devices connected to ATC system. Now, I believe there are distribution level storage assets, but that's at distribution level. So right now, there are 0 storage projects connected to ATC. As I mentioned before, Order 841 came out. I think it was a couple of years ago, and that compliance is being finalized, and that opens the markets 2 storage devices.
Mhm.
And so now, Kristin, what you see is we've got 7 projects from various developers that are in the MISO interconnection process, that would be located on our system. I've got a couple stats here that you might be interested in. So we've got 7 projects, and I just looked at our queue information this morning, so this is hot off the press. You've got for a total of 314 megawatts. That's a lot.
Yes.
Right? And so, and the largest of those projects, you have 2 out there that are 75 megawatts each. So
Wow.
that's sizable. And so
Location-wise, where are we looking at here?
I could say pretty much throughout Wisconsin.
Okay.
I hesitate to say where specifically are they. However, some of that information is publicly available on MISO's website for the interconnection queue. But there's a number of them in the South, but there's some throughout the state.
What consideration do you have as you look at the queue and you think of those projects? What comes to your mind? Are there special steps you would need to take, or different ways you look at planning around them?
Yeah. So in general, we would evaluate a storage device as we would other generators. We apply NERC standards, NERC reliability standards. We follow our tariff, and we also we have interconnection guidelines, company-specific energy or interconnection guidelines. And there are some specific things, I believe, that are related to inverter-based technologies. I don't have more details beyond that, but in general, these are viewed just like other resources that are connected to the system, and with some specific nuances for the inverter-based technology.
Good. Bob, I have one question here I just want to ask as an aside.
Fire away.
Does that pretty much cover everything you wanted to talk about? Can we go into the last question about all the power, or was there anything else you think I should ask?
Sure. No, that's really good. I think that's pretty, let me just run through here real quick. One other thing that I would throw out there, and this is maybe a parting shot before we get into all the power, is that our ultimate vision, and this goes back to the flexibility of storage, that you could use it for multiple things. Our ultimate vision, Kristin, is that, okay, so think of this in chunks of effort. The first chunk of effort was get the regulatory framework to be able to use storage as a transmission asset. And we've had a really robust, a thorough discussion in MISO about how do you do that. And I'll tell you what, there's other parts of the country now that are considering this. PJM has a stakeholder process that they started. SPP has a stakeholder process that it started. So I believe this is, the Midwest was a leader here, I believe, on getting these rules in its tariff, or the mid-continent area. So, you've got the rules in place for storage as transmission. The next chunk of effort is, how do you use those storage as transmission devices? Could you possibly use them to provide market services? And why we think that's really important, and again, that's our vision, is because we want to be able to use our assets for our customers to their fullest extent, right? If this device is capable of also providing market service, but its priority or primary use would be for providing transmission service, but if we could use it to some degree to provide market service and use that revenue to offset the cost of these assets, that's going to ultimately benefit our customer. That's what we're pushing for. So it's the first chunk was get storage recognized as a transmission asset. The next chunk is let's use these to their fullest extent, use them in the market as well as for transmission service. We know that's a long road ahead. We're willing to walk it, and because we ultimately think that'll benefit our customer.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
Now to everyone's favorite question. If you had all the power in the energy industry for a day, what would you do with it?
Okay, so
it seems like you were thinking about this.
I've been thinking about this because I wish it would. I'm not the most patient person in the world, so
I can identify with that.
So there has been a lot of work over time, and we're working on it now for creating long duration storage. Now, I mentioned earlier in our conversation that the Wapaka project it's a 2-hour solution.
Yes.
For a transmission owner and looking at the issues we face, it would be really great if we had longer duration and it was cost effective. Now, for instance, and that wasn't reliant on some geographical feature. Like, and what I mean by that is pump storage hydro has reservoirs and a reservoir and elevation, right? It needs a lot of land, right, to be able to do that. A lot of water. You also have compressed air storage that that you need salt deposits. We don't have those here in the Midwest. So if we could get a long duration battery, and there's work on it right now, they're called flow batteries. And they're early on in their development. But if I had all the power in the world, I'd make it happen today. Because, and no offense to DOE and all the manufacturers working on it, but right. I would, if I could snap my fingers and it would happen now, I would do that, because I think that would be a real helpful, really helpful for our purposes. So that would be what I'd go for.
For impatient people like us, how long do you think we'll have to wait?
I would say it, and this is just ballparking it. Right now, you've got vendors out there that have been working on this issue for quite a while. You've got some projects that are sort of in the beta test. I'd say it's going to be maybe another 3 to 5 years before they really get commercial. But I think there's a lot of focus on it, Kristin, because I think it would provide a lot of value, and the industry sees it, and those the manufacturers see it too.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Bob. It was great talking to you.
Oh, this is a lot of fun. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for what you and Customers First do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to Tom Content and Bob McKee for those interviews, and thank you to all of our listeners. Please remember to subscribe to The Electric Wire wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire. We'll be back in a couple weeks with a new episode. Thanks, everyone.